Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for participating in my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a semi-retired electrical engineer. I've gone part-time with my former company, which is fine because it's remote anyway. I moved back to Oregon from San Diego 2 years ago, just in time for COVID. But I've been in high tech since I got out of college. You can tell I'm gray. So I've had almost a 50-year career in electronics, but I've had a 60-year love affair with space. So I'm just a space nut since before the Mercury program. I've never worked in aerospace, which is actually um, good for avoiding the cycles of aerospace employment, up, down, up, down, up, down. Semiconductors are also cyclical, but not the same cycles. So it's interesting. Um, but in any event, I do, as a volunteer to pass on information. Somehow I ended up running Facebook group, the first and not the largest, but I believe the best curated one on Facebook about devoted to SpaceX. So I've been a SpaceX enthusiast, new space, ever since the shuttle quit flying. I had to find a new hobby, and SpaceX is my hobby. It was good. I used to live 2 hours away from headquarters, so it was easy to go to visit SpaceX friends. Because running a group, you get hundreds of SpaceX employee friends. They don't always post. They're not allowed to use social media much, but private messages and friendships develop. Why am I on Facebook? It's not the best forum. It's a terrible forum. It's software for administrators is worse than the worst web forum software package out there. But it's where a huge underserved audiences of new enthusiasts, people who don't use Reddit or don't use web forums are on Facebook. Relatives of employees, neighbors of employees, all kinds of new fans, especially outside the US fans, are on Facebook because it's easy for them. They're not always the best behaved people, but we try to keep a very well-behaved, professional, curated forum that some people have said it's because of this forum, it's the only reason they're on Facebook, which is a lot like I aspire to the discipline and high level technical discussions that happen on Space Hipsters. So, so I know those folks, and also it's yeah, it's an outreach. It's something to do that you want to do when you get either older or you're an experienced enthusiast. You want to pass on the enthusiasm. So that's my goal at this age in life. I'm also trying to volunteer at a local Portland, Oregon science and space museum, but that with that you're one-on-one with dozens of people, not thousands of people at a time. So Facebook is a good audience. And I also, besides being an electrical engineer, I'm also a tech writer. So I type quickly and, and so forth. So it's fun to pass on, answer questions, and so forth. Try to pass on my enthusiasm.
Well,
Go
maybe
ahead.
the best
Thanks.
place to start is where it started for you. If you could, can you think back 60 years to when you first got interested? And was there like a specific moment that sort of captivated your attention?
Oh, for me, it was old black and white TV and newspapers, but I was fascinated by one of the first payloads that was interesting was Echo, huge aluminized mylar reflection balloon that went into a very short orbit and was used to bounce radio signals off of. I was a science fiction reader from about age 6. So So space just naturally was where science fiction became real for me. And so I was interested in Vanguard and Redstone and all the early rockets. Alan Shepard and John Glenn were fascinating. That was also the time of a huge Red Scare. I tried to convince my dad to build a bomb shelter in the basement, even though we were 100 miles from Boston, and of no interest as a target to the communists. But I was an impressionable youngster and said, "Oh, we've got to get some concrete blocks and be safe." So in any event, I just grew up with rockets. Grew up reading as much science fiction as possible. Very much like Elon. Elon grew up reading science fiction, pretty much. And my wife was the same way. We met at a science fiction convention. Because we were the kind of readers, sometimes our parents said, "Go to bed," and we'd be reading by flashlights under the bed covers. That's what kids did in the 50s.
That is
But I
awesome.
learned some of my best physics, even though some of it was fractured physics and space opera, but I learned some of my best physics concepts from science fiction, and then went to find out for what was real, what was impossible in school. It just stimulated my imagination, and we're hoping, especially now, SpaceX is enabling orbital tourism by astronauts who are not paid NASA professionals, but very well trained amateurs. And that's going to inspire another generation of younger folks. I mean, younger folks, even 40-year-olds for me are young.
Well, my new thing is I think life really begins at 50. So
Indeed.
Everything until then is practice.
And after that, but if you lose sight of learning, you're just stagnating. So yeah, it's a bad day when you don't learn something new. I'm a little interested in your background and goals too, if you don't mind sharing. What's your project?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in space exploration as well. My father used to take me to the Johnson Space Center back before Space Center Houston existed, and it was an open campus. You would literally walk between the buildings and go to exhibits that were kind of set up as an afterthought. So that was kind of a neat thing. Watched Star Trek. Really two things interest me in school or during that time was computers and space. When I graduated, the internet took off, and anybody with any type of computer skills immediately got a job. And then once you get into a profession, start raising a family, you go from job to job to job. So space has been kind of like a sideline interest of mine as well, just like for you. I started the North Houston Space Society chapter. We have monthly meetings that do outreach and try to educate and encourage and inspire people. And I've also been volunteering about once a month at Space Center Houston, which has been kind of neat. So I started this project I don't know if you remember Artemis Day 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And Doug Laverio, the associate administrator that was supposed to get us to the moon by 2024.
Indeed.
And his lapel pin that counted down the days to the end of 2024.
Oh, don't remember that. That's cool.
And he was going to go around NASA and highlight a NASA hero of the day, somebody that was actively getting us to the moon. And so that inspired this project. I was like, wouldn't it be cool to go and interview everyday people? So I was planning to interview people at Starbucks and on the street, primarily focus on non-space people. But then COVID lockdown happened and I had to go virtual. And then I see it as being a time capsule for generations yet unborn to kind of see this moment before we take those next steps. And it would have been silly to have a collection of people who uniformly had no clue what was going on. So I'm glad to include space people now.
Yeah, no, I wear SpaceX shirts, jackets, or hats everywhere I can. Especially now I can travel again after vaccination. So actually, I'm leaving Monday for a week in Washington D.C. because I haven't been to the Air and Space Museum for 25 years, and they're closing for 6 months next year. So
Oh,
it's time to get there and see what's some of the exhibits are aging, and I've never been to Udvar Hazy in Dulles, so it's that's a bucket list trip for me. But wherever I can, especially on airplanes, I wear SpaceX things. And surely every single trip, somebody asks if I work for SpaceX. And I said, no, but I'm a volunteer on Facebook. So, and that sometimes opens a conversation.
that is really neat. I got the SpaceX luggage tags too. I think those look pretty neat. They look like the drone ships.
Oh, I've,
So
I've got about 10 sets of those. Sometimes I give them away. Um, so, yep, yep. I used to give away too many. I also did brew pub lectures in San Diego. I've started doing that again in Portland. But every 2 or 3 months, I'd give a lecture at a brew pub in my hometown that had science lectures every Friday night with some astrophysicist or fan or rocket company staff or author, or we had Tim Dodd a couple times. The everyday astronaut was in town, so he came by and did a lecture. But yeah, it was all about science outreach at this brew pub, and that's another whole venue. Um, Sometimes we'd get 150 people in a place licensed for 100. that was that was a little bit marginal sometimes, but there's a huge underserved audience of people who are fans of beer and science. And one of the regular lectures we had was the science of making beer and so forth.
wow, it sounds like they would be the market for those brewing companies that were taking hops to outer space to brew beer with space beer of some type.
Yep. No, there's space beer, space whiskey, space wine. Not that they really changed their nature up there, but it's a gimmick. Yep.
So, just going back to your beginning interest in space, you mentioned science fiction as being a catalyst for that interest. Were there some authors or particular works that stand out in your mind as having been particularly influential?
Oh, I think my wife and I both were interested and suckered in by the Heinlein juveniles. Robert Heinlein did a bunch of novels and short stories targeted for young adults. It's the young adult market is huge, especially the imagination, the imaginative ones. So yeah, there were two that I remember. One was Heinlein, but Red Planet was one, and that stimulated an interest in Mars. And of course, the physics were all poorly understood at the time. So the Heinlein knew they needed breathers, but they thought it was cold enough and there was water in the canals, or they made canals, that long distance travel was enabled by ice skates or skate mounted trains. But anyway, another was Alan Norris, Raiders from the Rings, which had it was the classic Earth versus Belters story that's even now on Netflix with Expanse. So classic colony tries to break away from the overbearing Earth, and conflicts develop. Of course, the Belters have the physical high ground and mass drivers, so it's hard to shoot down very not dense army coming from space when they can chuck rocks at anything that doesn't move on the Earth. But anyway, yeah, Heinlein was one of my early influencers. Arthur C. Clarke was another, and of course, Isaac Asimov was one of my favorites. Isaac was not so much into ray guns and spaceships as the rest, but he had the advantage of being in New York City when I lived near Boston. And my wife and I actually met at a science fiction convention in 1971. There was only about 300 people, but Isaac Asimov, who wouldn't fly, took the train from New York City, came up, and he ended up standing right in front of me in the registration line. And I was carrying one of his books to be autographed. And what are the odds that I'd be behind Isaac Asimov in a registration line at a 300-person convention? So we ended up working on the committee for those conventions for about the next 20 years as a hobby. And then I moved away from Boston, got away from science fiction fandom, organized fandom, and went back to my love of space program and so forth.
That's amazing. I love Robert Heinlein too. I believe Door into the Summer was the first Heinlein novel I had read.
Oh, sweet stuff. There were some, my wife has an issue sometimes with the politics. She confuses the person with what he's writing, but that's a problem with a lot of authors. But Heinlein did have a passion in life for blood donations. He organized or participated in blood donations at many, many events, including world conventions, where you'd have thousands of people. But that was one of his passions was blood donations. Very altruistic.
That's amazing. So having experienced the first time that we went to the moon and looking at this time that we're attempting to go to the moon, what are some differences that stand out to you?
Oh man, it used to be difficult for an event to have 1 billion people watch it. In 1969, it was hard. Of course, communication was tougher. That was the summer, 1969 was the summer I just graduated high school. And so that was a super exciting summer. I never actually was able to go to Saturn V launch. I was getting out of high school, starting college, had no money to travel. Until then, I was lucky enough, my parents would drive every year or two from Massachusetts down to Florida to visit my grandfather, who was south of Miami. And we would always, every single year, religiously stop at Cape Canaveral, or later Kennedy Space Center. And sort of like you in Houston in the early days, you used to be able to drive right out to the pads with your private car. You could go out to the rusty old Redstone pads, Atlas pads, and so they weren't so rusty then. But there were earlier pads, Delta and Thor, and so forth at the south end of ICBM Row. And you could just drive out to them. It was a much kinder, gentler time.
Well, apparently you could still do that in Baikonur. I've interviewed somebody earlier this week who had actually done a documentary of somebody taking off from Baikonur. And he was literally like right next to the Soyuz as they rolled it down the tracks.
Yeah, well, if you have a badge, you can be right next to a SpaceX badge. Or I've been lucky enough to have gotten NASA social media press credentials a few times until COVID shut that down. I was always the oldest. I think the first one I did, I was age 60 or 61, but I was always the oldest social media person. And the kids were just amazed. What? You're old. How can you be, social media? And I said, well, once grandparents got onto Facebook, all the kids fled. It was left to us. So, Facebook is ours now. Get off it. But it was fun because to be an old space fan in among kids, right, 18 to 40-year-olds who are also into social media. They have different audiences. NASA chose them as influencers of different audiences, trying to get snowboarders interested in space. They had somebody with, an Instagram person with 100,000 followers on who are all snowboarders, and these folks, they need to be brought up to speed about space and history so they can talk competently to their audience. But they used to, when NASA would bus us from site to site for a presentation or a briefing, or to go look inside the VAB or something that's off the public tour, these kids would fight over getting to sit next to me on the bus and interview me. Yeah, that's what journalists do in downtime. Anyway, we always interview each other, but I was the one getting interviewed a lot. Like, oh man, SpaceX is launching from Cape Canaveral station LC-40. What did that used to launch? And I'd explain about Titan, blah blah, all the rest. So, what's Titan? Well, that was Gemini. What's Gemini? Oh, it's a two-person version of Mercury. Oh, what was Mercury? Yeah, it's fascinating. It just, give any of us old, experienced fans a whiteboard and a microphone, we can talk for a month.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Do you ever come to Houston?
I've been, the last time I was there was maybe 4 years ago. I got a call from SpaceX friend who worked at McGregor, and said, "Hey, if you can get here Sunday, I can get you I can get you a tour of McGregor." Not organized tours, way before COVID, way before security lockdowns. And so I said, "I'll be there, whatever, just name the date, name the time. For a tour of McGregor, I'll do anything." So I got to go there. And then I said, "Hey, I'm in the neighborhood. I might as well go to Houston." So I was lucky enough about 6 months later to get an invite from a friend who's a meteorite dealer in Florida, and he has contacts all through the space artifact community, including Building 31. He was friends with the moon rock researcher who was semi-retired and had his safe stolen. And that was big in the news, FBI, about maybe 8 or 10 years ago. But he wangled us an invite, so I was able to, which most of the people working in Building 31 haven't been to the inner vault, moon rock vault with the glove boxes. And so I was able to get, I should send you pictures sometime, but I was able to get into the moon rock vault and not touch any of the rocks, but at least observe them and look through the microscope at the Genesis rock and all those things. Yeah. And so Houston has fond memories. And I sat in Gene Kranz's chair during a tour, someday they'll have level 9 tours again, and we'll get to do that again.
Yeah, but, indeed.
Yeah, Houston's cool.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the things I hope that happens in this new Artemis generation, that moon rocks become so plentiful everybody can have one.
That's one of the ways that they can fund some of the private mining missions, is sample returns starting from the moon and then later on from Mars. But yeah, I've got a maybe a 1 gram piece of a Martian meteorite, which it's just amazing that a piece of Mars was blasted off of Mars, ended up wandering through the space, ended up on Earth, and was found on Earth and identified as a piece of Mars, which is pretty rare. But a lot of meteorites are found on top of the sand in Morocco by locals who understand that there are no rocks that normally show up on top of the sand in Morocco. So anything that's sitting there is probably from extraterrestrial origin, and they bring it to a particular bazaar. And my meteorite dealer friend goes to Morocco often and negotiates to buy these meteorites. Sometimes he negotiates to buy them before anybody's analyzed them to prove they're from the moon or Mars. So sometimes he loses, sometimes he scores big. But yeah, so I've got this piece of Mars. So my daughter ran a movie night one night, and I brought a Blu-ray of The Martian just after it came out. And at the end of the movie, with her friends, her 30, 40-year-old friends, I passed around this piece of what looked like gravel, which was a piece of Mars. And the kids were just amazed. Kids, 40-year-old kids. They're just beside themselves. Oh my God, we're watching a movie and now we're touching a piece of Mars, because you don't get to do that even in most museums. They're not going to let you touch, except, even in Kennedy, right? They'll have a moon rock, but it'll be embedded in lucite, and you have to touch the edge of it, right? Or the flat exposed part. You don't get to hold it in your hand. So, yeah, and I could see a sparks. So if I can ever do that at a brew pub, pass around a piece of lunar meteorite or Mars meteorite, that's another way to make it immediate and tangible for folks. And that's something you don't get on TV. But sure, we're going to have, 4 billion people watching when Elon puts a Starship on Mars, even for a test, uncrewed test. There's going to be billions of people watching. Same thing for HLS. First time we do uncrewed back to the moon, it's going to ignite millions of people for new enthusiasts.
Do you plan?
It makes me want to go back in time 50 years and take better care of myself so I can survive with style for another 10, 15 years before this all gets the world excited again.
Do you plan to go to Florida to watch Artemis 1 take off?
Yeah, probably, right? It's another thing. I'll go. I've seen enough launches now that I'll go to SpaceX launches if they're like Falcon Heavy and 2 boosters return to land. Same for California. It's not so interesting to watch a launch anymore that just goes and you lose sight of it and it lands on a drone ship. Coming back to land 4 miles away like they do in Vandenberg, that's interesting. Artemis is especially poignant because it's all expendable. So $4 billion a launch and it's 100% expendable. That's old space thinking. Sorry, not quite as interesting as the way the future with Starship. I understand how it came to be. I understand why it got funded. But personally, I've moved on from old space. Even though I'm old, I'm a young at heart enthusiast. I can't wait to see SpaceX's first Starship orbital test early next year. Artemis has fantastic technology in it, but it may not be sustainable in the long run. At that price, but it's going to be the hugest, loudest thing with the most thrust of anything launching. So how can you not want to go and watch all the car alarms go off? If you can get within 20 miles of the launch pad, it'll be extraordinary.
Well, Bill, I feel like we could talk for hours, and I wish I had arranged it so we could. Unfortunately, I have to run to another meeting, but I'd love to catch up with you some other time and have some a little bit more open-ended, if that's possible.
Love to, at your convenience. No sweat.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. Have a good rest of your day.
See ya. See ya. Bye.